It is a pleasure to be here. I know we got to stop here about a week ago and drop off our RV, and that was a huge blessing to us. And I got to see the church building, and we've been looking forward to being back ever since. My name is Randy Brown. This is my wife, Esther. If you'd stand up, honey. And you saw our three kids. That excited one there is Dean. Then we've got Elijah, our only daughter right in the middle, Gwendolyn. And then we have two little boys, Scott and Chris, in the nursery. And God has called us out of First Bible Baptist Church of Bakersfield, California, to go to the nation of Japan. And we've partnered with Beacon International Baptist Missions out of Johnson City, Tennessee. And at this time, if you could play the video, and then I'll have a few things more to say about that after. Imagine that you have been raised in a society where you have to excel in every way. You have to be successful in academics, in business, and in every personal interaction. You have to be absolutely perfect. In a country obsessed with perfection, where does this leave those who fail? Failure in Japan leaves you with no path to redemption. You have shamed your parents, your ancestors, your nation, and your gods. You have no hope. Too many Japanese turn to historically accepted suicide. 3 Japanese commit suicide every hour, 25,000 people per year. Then there are many who aren't willing to commit suicide and choose a path of hikikomori. It is those who lock themselves in their bedrooms for 10, 20, or even 30 plus years. They have no hope, so they put pause on their life. This hopelessness doesn't just impact the minority. Loneliness and depression is a constant fact of life for the Japanese people. Families are breaking down. Fathers are absent. Some working so much they see their family for less than an hour a week. 80% of Japanese wonder why they even exist. 10% wish they had never been born. Japan is a beautiful place filled with wonderful people, but it's like the whited sepulcher. It's beautiful on the outside and dead on the inside. God has entrusted us with the gospel of Jesus Christ. He has called my wife Esther and I to go to the nation of Japan, to Okayama Prefecture, to plant a church there in His name. I would ask you to join us in prayer for the Japanese people. The Japanese youth of today are 6 times more likely than the older generations to identify as Christians. The door is open in a way that we haven't seen since the end of World War II. There are 125 million Japanese. They are the largest unreached people group in the developed world. Pray for laborers for the field. There is 1 missionary for every 56,000 Japanese. The harvest is plenteous. The laborers are few. Our plan is to be in Japan by the end of 2024. Pray that the gospel has free reign, that the people of Japan see their need for Jesus Christ, that His name would be glorified, that indigenous churches would be planted, and that the Japanese people would find hope in their Creator, Jesus Christ. I had seen that video, I don't even know how many times, probably 50 times, before something about that last shot from the in the mall caught my eye. And that was from a missionary friend of mine. He was taking that video, just a normal day at the mall, got a good vantage point. But if you look at all the men, they're all wearing almost the same exact outfit. They've got a white shirt on and dark slacks, so they don't stand out. If you go to a mall in America, you're going to see everybody looking completely different. They're raised to say you just fit in. You conform to the mold of what it is to be a Japanese person. We don't care what you are on the inside, and they don't. They care nothing about what's in the heart of man. They only care that you put on that outward show, that you have everything in order, that you look the part. They'll even go to the place of forcing kids to dye their hair dark black because it's not quite dark enough, so that they look the part. But inside, they have no hope. They don't have the hope that we have in Jesus Christ. That is the one thing they're really lacking. And because they don't have that hope, and they don't believe that anybody really cares about them, that's why the suicide rate is through the roof. There's a place there near Mount Fuji called the Suicide Forest. If you were to go to the Suicide Forest today, you might find a string going off into the forest. And the reason they do that is because it is one of the most demon-oppressed places I've ever heard of. There's no animals, there's no insects, there's no birds. It's almost completely dead quiet. The trees grow in just really, it's kind of hard to describe exactly how it looks, but it's very confusing. It's a maze. And if they didn't have that string, if they decided not to take their life, well, they weren't going to be getting back out. So if you were to see that string going into the forest, there's a better than 50-50 chance that at the end of that string, there's a Japanese person who gave up and said, I've had enough. This life is pointless. I can't live up to the standards I'm being held to. And they've gone in there to end it. The Japanese, they have no hope. But there seems to be a harvest coming. Men have been going there since the end of World War II and pouring themselves into the Japanese people. And it is called the graveyard of missionaries, because men have gone and they've planted and they've sowed and they haven't seen any fruit for 50 years. But something seems to be changing. The young people, they're starting to see that their society has brought them to a point where they can't succeed anymore, and they're looking elsewhere. My vision for Japan, which I think is God's vision for Japan, is that in 20 or 30 years, that 6% of teenagers right now that's open to the gospel would be 20%, 10%. That Japan could become a Christian nation. I believe that God is really preparing Japan after years of harvest or years of sowing for a bountiful harvest. The signs are there. Lord willing, it goes that direction, and I want to be there and be part of it. God's called us to go there. And I actually mentioned in the video that we're aiming to be there by 2024. My son Elijah there told me about 6 months ago. He's like, Dad, I'm praying we get there by the end of 2023. It's like, well, if God wants us to get there, I felt that 2024 was a reasonable time. But God's got His blessing, and we're on track actually to get there by the end of 2023. The faith of a child. The sermon tonight, and I want you to keep this in mind, is what manner of man can be used by God. There was a survey done in 1993. And mind you, this was just given to Christians in general. It wasn't given to just Baptists, but anybody under that umbrella. So I do believe that if you were to ask all these questions in a Baptist church, that you would probably come up with higher numbers. But I'll be honest, I would be hard-pressed to say that the actions backing up those words would match the numbers, what would come out of their mouths. Because they asked different questions. So one of the primary questions they asked was who was responsible for evangelism. And in 1993, 10% of Christians, mind you, this is people actually going to church, not just America in general, but people sitting in pews across this nation, 10% of them said that the church has responsibility. I have no responsibility to fulfill the Great Commission. That was in 1993. 10% said that they had no part in the primary purpose of the church. Can anyone tell me which direction they thought it went? Did it improve or get worse in the 25 years between that survey and they did a follow-up survey 25 years later? Think it got worse or got better? Yeah, it got worse. So this would have been in the early 2010s, 29%. So in 25 years, nearly 3 times more people said, I have no part in fulfilling the Great Commission. That belongs to the church. If we were to put that into perspective, it would be roughly about this portion of the people in the room. 1 in 3 said, I have no part to play in evangelizing the lost. That's up to the church to do it. They had some other questions in there, and 95% of Christians have never one time led someone to the Lord. 80% rarely or never witness in a given 6-month period. Less than 2% at a time are involved in the ministry of evangelism. 71% do not give financially to fulfilling the Great Commission. And this, to me, this next statistic is kind of the low bar. 48% have never invited someone to church. Half of Christians. And I say that's the low bar because inviting someone to church, you're saying, I might not be confident enough to give you the gospel, but I can invite you to somewhere you will. Because I know if from this pulpit, this Bible is being preached. I saw that up there. The Bible is still true in 2022. The gospel is being preached from this pulpit and pulpits all over the nation. And 50% of Christians who say they won't even invite people to come hear the gospel. Not even one time. And this is where I feel that we have a disconnect. You have a majority not being involved at all. But if you ask them, 75% of those respondents felt that they could adequately communicate the gospel. That they understood the gospel of Jesus Christ, that he came, that he died, he was buried, and rose again 3 days later for your sins, for my sins. And that as a free gift, believing that he did that, you could ask him to save you and he would save you. 75% felt that they could communicate that adequately. Only 12% said they're not able. So the majority say they could, but the majority also isn't. There's a disconnect there. Let's turn to Romans 12, verse 1. And as we turn to Romans 12, this is in the context of Paul spending 11 chapters talking about the work that Jesus Christ did for every individual. The redemptive work that he did on the cross, his death, his burial, his resurrection, and all the many ramifications from that. And we get here to chapter 12, verse 1, and he starts it off with, I beseech you therefore, brethren, by the mercies of God, that ye present your bodies a living sacrifice, holy, acceptable unto God, which is your reasonable service. And be not conformed to this world, but be ye transformed by the renewing of your mind,